In this series of videos, we've looked at typical examples of a sheet of anti-spin, long, medium and short pimples. But to say that all these particular types play the same would be wrong. So please bear this in mind when you're looking at our general observations.
Spin reversal.
People often talk about spin reversal with these types of rubbers, but that term can be misleading.
In this footage, the opponent plays a topspin shot to the long pimples and their return gives the opponent backspin. But this doesn't mean the long pimples reverse the spin on the ball. What they actually did was allow the incoming topspin, seen by the ball rotating in a clockwise direction, to continue spinning in the clockwise direction after contact with the long pimples. In this example, it's the reversal in the direction of the ball which results in the opponent facing backspin, not a reversal in the direction of the rotation of the ball.
However, as most players tend to be interested in the type of spin that they're going to be facing on a return rather than the rotational direction of the ball, this is what we've actually referred to when reviewing these types of rubbers.
Reaction to incoming spin where the ball has bounced.
Although we included high-speed footage in the second video of the ball making contact with the blade from a downward direction, in these particular observations we're only really interested in the ball bouncing upwards, similar to a type of blocking shot.
Long pimples. Topspin. Clockwise rotation of the ball. When topspin was played onto the long pimples, backspin was returned. The amount of the spin returned seemed to be greatest when the ball bounced closest to the bat. The rebound trajectory back off the bat also tended to be relatively steeper when contact was made off the bottom of the bat. Backspin. Anti-clockwise rotation of the ball. When backspin was played onto the long pimples at quicker speed, slight variations in float were returned. At slower speeds, light backspin was returned when the ball made contact with the bottom and middle part of the bat, and float when contact was made with the top part of the bat. The rebound trajectory back off the bat tended to be very flat. Anti-spin. Topspin. When topspin was played onto the anti-spin, backspin was returned. Again, the amount of spin returned seemed to be greatest when the ball bounced closest to the bat. The rebound trajectory back off the bat also tended to be relatively steep. Backspin. When backspin was played onto the anti-spin at quicker speed, slight variations in float were returned. At slower speeds, light backspin was returned when the ball made contact with the bottom and middle part of the bat, and float when contact was made with the top part. The rebound trajectory back off the bat also tended to be very flat. These results were very similar to those for the long pimples. Medium pimples. Topspin. At slower speeds, when the ball made contact with the bottom of the bat, backspin was returned. The higher at the bat contact was made, the less backspin was returned, until at the top of the bat, variations of float were returned. At higher speeds, backspin was returned regardless of where the ball made contact, and there was more of a catapult effect on the ball, probably due to a thicker sponge. Backspin. At both slower and quicker speeds, the medium pimples returned backspin, regardless of where on the bat the ball hit. The rebound trajectory off the bat was also downwards, i.e. back in the direction the ball came from. The faster the ball made contact with the rubber, the greater the relative downward angle, which seems to suggest the ball is gripping more on the medium pimples. Short pimples. Topspin. The reaction of the ball was very similar to the medium pimples in terms of the type of spin returned. However, when faster balls were played onto the rubber surface, the amount of backspin returned when contact was made with the middle and top part of the bat was much lower, sometimes bordering on float. The rebound trajectory of the ball was also typically a little higher than the medium pimples. Backspin. The results were again similar to the medium pimpled rubber. At both slower and quicker speeds, the short pimples returned backspin, regardless of where the ball hit the bat. Side spin off the bounce.
Side spin was much harder to film and analyse. This was mainly due to the fact that when I played the ball onto these rubber surfaces, I tended to do it with either a trace of top or a trace of bottom. Because of this, we can only make general observations about whether backspin or topspin is returned, and not talk about the amount of side spin which is included with this. In addition to the side spin high-speed footage you saw in the second video, I'm including here video footage from above the bat. This will give you a little bit of an idea of how the ball reacts when it actually makes contact and in the sideways movement of the particular types of rubber. In other words, which rubber reacts more to the side spin. Of the four rubbers tested, short pimples was the most affected in terms of the angle of rebound off the rubber surface when the ball contained side spin. Then medium pimples, then anti-spin, and lastly long pimples. Ironically, although the long pimples were least affected in terms of the directional change of the ball, the long pimples actually generated a greater amount of spin than any of the rubbers. Reaction at the point of contact. Although more subjective, when you watch the high-speed footage, there are times when you can see the ball either physically climb up or climb down the surface of the rubber. Other times the ball just rebounds straight off, and occasionally it'll spin on the spot. This skidding effect only happens with the medium and long pimples, and only occasionally when topspin was played onto the rubber surface. Go figure. The most common reaction of the ball on all these rubber surfaces was typically for it to just simply rebound off that rubber surface.
Rebound speed, judged by a straight line between 2 points and not the total distance travelled by the ball. In our test, the long pimples had no sponge. The anti-spin had a sponge which I believe to be 1.2mm thickness, the short pimples sponge was 1.5mm, and the medium pimples 1.8mm. Whilst the medium pimples did generally have the fastest rebound speed, the rubber type, which was typically the slowest, was not the long pimples which had no sponge, but the anti-spin. In fact, the long pimples were the fastest on 6 occasions, usually when fed backspin or side spin. The short pimples had the second thickest sponge at 1.5mm, and typically had either the second fastest or fastest rebound speed, where the incoming spin was predominantly topspin or side spin.
So in our test, the combination of the medium pimples and the thicker sponge resulted in the medium pimples having the fastest rebound speed. Then it was the short pimples, then the long pimples, and lastly the anti-spin. Ironically, although the long pimples had no sponge, it was the long pimples that gave the greatest variation in terms of whether it was the fastest or the slowest. Anti-spin was consistently the slowest one.
And this suggests the anti-spin's rubber and sponge combination was the best at absorbing any incoming speed. Other factors to consider: impact of contact with the table surface and the momentum of the ball. If you watch the ball in this clip, the ball hits the table surface, which slows down the anti-clockwise rotation of the ball. The ball then hits the anti-spin surface and stops rotating until it lands on the table, at which point it starts to rotate anti-clockwise again.
So in our example, what you see coming off the bat, float, isn't necessarily what you're going to actually face after the ball's bounced, like topspin.
In the second example, this time with short pimples, the ball rotates anti-clockwise until it contacts with the table, at which point it stops rotating, until it makes contact with the bat, at which point the ball rebounds and starts to rotate clockwise.
So remember, although we've been describing the type of spin that comes off the rubber surface, you also need to take into account the spin after it's bounced on the table. And these subtle variations, particularly with float, can get you into a lot of trouble.
How important is where the ball makes contact on the blade?
Throughout these tests we've referred to where the ball has made contact with the top, middle or bottom of the bat. But does this actually impact on the spin that's been returned, or is there something else at work?
To test this, I repositioned the bat with medium pimples on, so the top part was level with where the bottom of the bat would normally be. I then matched this film, as best as I could, with the film of the ball making contact with the bottom of the bat as normal. As you can see, the results are very similar, which suggests there are bigger factors to consider. For example, the angle of contact between the bat and the ball, speed of the ball, and the amount of spin.
Whatever you think about these videos in terms of our testing or our conclusions, we hope at least they've raised the profile of spin and also what you can expect when you play against or with these types of rubbers. Thank you for watching.